Hi, and welcome to Dipping and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very fortunate at the start of January to be sitting down with the absolutely marvellous Lejla Dauti. Lejla, I have met in person. I've followed her a lot on Instagram. She's on LinkedIn. She's everywhere, basically. And she's an incredible human. And I think it would only be right to pass over to Lejla to explain a lot about what she does. But she's a domestic abuse specialist, but that is not where it ends. There is so much more to Lejla. So good morning, Lejla.
Good morning, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me and thank you for the intro. Hi to everyone listening. I'm Lejla Dauti. I'm the founder of an incredibly powerful female survivor movement called Lejla Please Tell My Story. I create survivor-led spaces, campaigns, and programs that tackle gender-based violence head on. I'm also a qualified and trained IDVA, which is an independent domestic violence advocate. And I've worked for the last 2 years frontline with victims, supporting them to safety. I have a huge vested interest in helping women recover. So I will now, the next part of my journey is studying and training to become a therapist so that I can support women further in their recovery. I think sticking on that recovery aspect, um, what really truly excites me of all the work that I do is supporting women in their recovery and witnessing those really powerful moments where a survivor realizes that leaving a perpetrator isn't just possible and doable, but that life after leaving is beautiful as well. And that you can absolutely have a life where you're not just living constantly in survival, but you're actually thriving. But essentially, when I take off all of my professional hats and stop spinning all the fucking plates like most of us do, um, I'm Lejla Doughty and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse.
Oh, I love that. I think that's possibly one of my favourite intros ever. I'm not gonna lie, that's amazing.
Thank
And
you.
you've summed it up in a nutshell. People go, well, what else can we talk about now? Because she's just summed it all up so eloquently. And it is, you're right. It is that life afterwards that I think when you're in it is so hard to see. And we talk
Absolutely.
about all these kind of metaphors, like light at the end of the tunnel, and all those things. And it's all true. But when you're in it, all you can see is the darkness. You can't see that actually life is
Yeah,
beautiful
yeah.
afterwards. That empowerment, that feeling that you can't describe to anybody else of knowing that you're in control of your own destiny. It's amazing, but it takes time. And having people like you out there doing what you're doing and supporting. And I think, we're seeing a lot in the government now talking about lived experience being so important. And it is.
Yeah,
There's a bit of a
it is.
divide, isn't there, with that? Because some people go, oh, lived experience, we can't rely on that. But actually, like anything in life, how can you best serve people unless you've experienced it?
Yeah, and I came to this crossroads in my own career. So I left in October 2019, my ex-husband who was the perpetrator, and I came to this bit of a crossroad because I was sharing my story and my lived experience, and I was sharing other women's experiences as well, and realized that I wanted to progress in terms of how I support women, and I understood that my lived experience was really important. But I wanted to develop professionally, which is why I
Yeah,
went and qualified as an IDVA. So I actually qualified off my own back as an IDVA, not in a role. I just
yeah,
knew that I wanted more of a professional experience and understanding in the sector and how the sector works. So having the two, the lived experience and the professional experience and qualifications, I think it's important to be able to deliver this work safely to
yes.
women.
Yes, 100%. And you're right. And it is that balance between having that professionalism and understanding the constraints that there are and all that side of things, but also that lived experience where you know how that person is feeling in that moment when you're trying to support them, but you also know that the systems that are in place,
Yeah.
you can almost see
Yeah.
ahead. It's like having kind of the sixth sense, isn't it? Knowing full well that certain things. I had a lady on recently called Catherine House, and she was at a conference we were both at recently, and she's a solicitor, and she does a pro bono clinic around family law. And again, she was saying it's those constraints around saying to people, I know exactly where you're coming from. And unfortunately, this is the law. And that's
Yeah.
where reality sets in for a lot of people, unfortunately. And we want to do the best we can by everybody. But there are those difficulties. And I think as long as people, victims and survivors, are supported with that compassion that you're clearly showing,
Absolutely.
that's the biggest element. Because I think society so often that blame and shame culture that we see all the time. Why didn't she just leave? Well, why were they abusive?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
how did you think she could leave? Give me your itinerary of how she should have done it better, you
Exactly,
know?
right? Give me the script of how a woman can perfectly leave a perpetrator when we know statistically that 72% of women and children are killed by their ex-partner in the first year after leaving. You tell me what script a woman is supposed to follow.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly it. And that's the difficulty is society try. I think that's the biggest challenge for anyone working in this sector is trying to change that perception
Oh,
around
absolutely.
and I know when it comes to, you know, for me personally, and anybody that knows me and anybody that listens knows that post-separation abuse for me is something that I think is massively overlooked because it's this idea around we go from the myth of that dangerous myth of why didn't they just leave, but then we'd
Yeah.
leave if somebody does, and I always say if someone manages to leave, because it's not always possible for everybody, if someone manages to leave a situation, then it becomes, well, you've left now, so everything should be okay. So we're constantly putting that blame and shame back onto the victim or survivor and going, well, it's down to you. You need to
Well,
make your life work now.
the thing is I think for so long that domestic abuse has been portrayed as this like thing in the media in soaps like EastEnders and Coronation Street. And
Yeah.
I'm talking about, like in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if I always use this example if you remember Trevor and Mo in
Yes.
EastEnders. And
Yes.
Trevor would just come home from the pub drunk and he would just
Yeah.
beat her up and do all of that. And
Yeah.
is the perception that people have of domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reality for a lot of victims. I'm not saying that, but actually for so many other women the reality is far deeper and more insidious. The abuse isn't just about the violence. The violence, if anyone knows what the power and control wheel is, you'll know that the violence, physical violence and sexual violence is, just the outer layer of
Yeah.
the power and control wheel, because really everything that comes before that is what lays the groundwork, the emotional abuse, the mental abuse, the trauma bonding, the gaslighting, the economical abuse. There's so many different forms of abuse that takes place in order for the violence to be perpetrated in the first place. So
Yeah.
it's not as easy as just to say, why didn't you just leave? I think like the reason why it's so hard to explain to people
Yeah.
how and why, even when you're in it, you don't even realize that you're a victim.
No,
There's so
no,
many
absolutely not.
misconceptions out there, so many misconceptions that we have of domestic abuse. And people think of domestic abuse as this over constant chaos and violence. But for example, in my own lived experience, it wasn't obviously chaotic all the time. He
Yes.
wasn't violent every day because he didn't need to be. That
No.
the chaos existed and that chaos did exist every single day, but it was underlying and it was insidious. So for me, he done such a good number on me, gaslighting me, that he didn't always need to exert violence. He absolutely did exert violence, but he didn't
Mm.
always need to.
Need to. Yeah.
But because just the threat of it there was enough.
Yes. Yeah.
And essentially, when in my own lived experience, when the gaslighting is so heavy, you genuinely think you're going crazy.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't recognize myself as a victim, right, I didn't recognize that this is domestic abuse, this is what's happening to me. I was still constantly monitoring my tone, my words, my reactions, monitoring what mood he was in when he came through the door. So, no, he didn't need to be violent every day. He'd
No.
already made me feel mentally unstable, and that had laid the groundwork for the control to be effective in the first place. I think even as I said, I didn't recognize myself as a victim. So for 8.5 years we were together. And I actually went to therapy, not because whilst I was with him, and then it wasn't because of the abuse per se and that he was abusive. I genuinely thought I was going crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember in my first session with my therapist, I sat down across from my therapist and I said to him, I was like, my marriage is failing and it's my fault. And luckily, my therapist he was incredible at the time. He saw straight through it. And by the third session with him, I had this moment of realization like, huh, I'm not crazy at all, am I? And in fact, none of this is my fault. What's happened? I'm
Mm.
not the one who's ruining this marriage. This is all you. Not one bit of it was me.
Mm.
And actually, in fact, Lejla Douti, was a victim of domestic abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And to come to that realization and to say those, I don't think people understand how powerful that is. that to get to that realization, because
Mm.
for many, many people, they never get to that realization, or it takes many, many years to be able to utter those words because instantly it makes you feel like a failure. It makes
Yeah.
you feel like, well, I've done something wrong, like you say, but to be able to say, hang on, no, I am the victim of
Yeah,
domestic abuse.
because we talk about domestic abuse and violence towards women and girls as if it's this like abstract concept. It's none of this is the concept. This is women's real lives.
Yeah.
Women die, and that's the reality. And that's why I do the work that I do. I can't put like sparklers and rainbows and pretty feathers around this
Mm.
topic because women die. That's the reality.
Yeah.
And even through my work, what women were saying to me at first when they're coming forward sharing their stories was, I've never seen myself represented
Mm.
as a victim because, as I said, like a lot of the time, what women say to me is, in domestic abuse campaigns, women are either blacked out figures, like completely anonymous figures, no, like they have no identity, or they're someone who's battered and bruised, cowering in the corner with their hands over their face.
Yes.
And women, survivors, were coming forward saying, I didn't see myself represented in these campaigns.
Mm.
Now I do, listening to the stories that you share, because I was a
Mm.
strong woman. I was independent. I did go to university. I had a great career. I was the breadwinner. I was everything that society tells me that a woman like me will never be a victim.
Mm. Exactly, because that's exactly it. Is we have this, unfortunately, again going back to society, this idea that a victim is from a particular demographic, or
Absolutely.
and it doesn't matter how much money you've got, how little money you've got. It doesn't discriminate. It does not discriminate across the board. It doesn't matter who you are. And do you know when you were saying then, you got me thinking back to Little Mo. And I'm a big EastEnders fan, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie. Not that there aren't other
I
soap
haven't
operas
watched
out
it in
there,
so long, but that was peak
but
EastEnders times.
it was
Like,
peaky stuff,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think it was quite, and I suppose in some ways a bit groundbreaking, like they were talking about abuse and oh
Yeah,
my God.
yeah, yeah.
And I remember there was one episode, and you just hit the nail on the head there, when I think he puts a head into the dinner or something like that, like really belittling, degrading, horrible. And yeah, for so many victims and survivors, belittling doesn't always come in that physical form. The
No, not at
belittling
all.
is the things that are said constantly, every day, drip, drip, drip fed to you, that you're not good enough. And I think that's why, for so many people, they feel when if they're, they are able to leave the relationship and they do start to seek support, is that it's the things that you notice straight away is their self-worth is shot to shit. Their self-esteem, their self-confidence, all the things, and it's always, I'm sorry, it's my fault, and this,
Yeah, yeah.
all those elements of them that once, and again, I always say this is, people have this idea that victims have always been like that. They've not, very often, they're
No,
very confident
no,
women, very powerful
absolutely.
women, very, amazingly bubbly, happy people. And so for a
Absolutely.
perpetrator, they love to break that down. That's more of a
Oh,
challenge.
absolutely. So I am originally from Kosovo. So I came here, just a little bit of background, from how day
Yeah.
one to how I got here. So I came to the UK in the mid 90s, fleeing genocide and ethnic cleansing. At the time, my father was really publicly resisting the regime. And for all Kosovan people, it was do or die. But if you were publicly resisting the regime, but it was
Yeah.
absolute certainty that you were going to be killed by the regime. And so my parents were faced with this decision, do we stay here and know for certain that our children will be murdered and us along with them, or do we flee to safety elsewhere? So I think any parent, you would absolutely choose the
Yes.
latter.
Yeah.
So they had to, up and leave and come to the UK and settled in the middle of London, grew up in a council estate on benefits because my parents had to leave all of their assets behind in order to seek safety. But now the irony of my childhood was that we fled this huge systemic institutional dictatorship, a genocidal regime to grow up in a completely different form of dictatorship. But this one
Yeah.
was a more intimate one because the first perpetrator I knew personally was my dad.
Mm.
And I grew up with him being a perpetrator of domestic abuse towards my mum and towards us as children. And, his perpetration was a very coercive. Again, the violence was very minimal because he didn't need to exert the violence because the coercive control was
Was
so
already
strong.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was very overtly controlling as well. And I remember growing up thinking, I'm never going to be like my mum. I'm never going to end up with a man like my dad. But then there I was. I'd gone to university, feeling this first sense of real freedom in my life. And it was around the age, I think it was 2021 when I met my ex-husband. And I was like, oh my God, here's this whirlwind of freedom I'm experiencing. And I meet this, what is seemingly a lovely guy. And he was so charming and witty and the
Yeah,
completely different soul of the party. And everybody loved him. And I thought I did too, right? I thought I'd cracked it because he seemed so different to my dad. He was constantly telling me how beautiful I was, how much he loved that I was strong and confident and independent, but fuck me, I was so wrong.
yeah,
Because actually, then for nearly a decade, for the best part of a decade, 8.5 years, I was trapped in another cycle of domestic abuse. That cycle that I just explained made me think that I was absolutely going crazy. And there I was, I'd sworn that I'd never be like my mother because I had this idea of what a perpetrator is like in my head. And I'd fallen hook, line, and sinker as if the script had already been written for me.
yeah, that's so true. And again, it's that idea around the future abusive relationships. So often people will say, "Oh my God, I've ended up in exactly the same situation as," and sadly, because so many children, and I think horrifically, so many children, going through the primary school system, etc., aren't taught about abuse.
Yeah.
There's a way of doing it in an age appropriate way, I truly believe, that would help children to see that
Absolutely.
actually both parents can love you, but
Yeah.
that behavior that parents displayed, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
That is not
Yeah.
acceptable. And I think that's the difficulty. So many children don't see it. So they live in that environment. And often goes around my head is like, which one's going to become, which child in that class of 30 kids
Yeah.
is going to become a victim or a perpetrator
And
because of that behavior?
the other problem is how much enabling and leeway we do with perpetrators,
Yeah,
with fathers, because we tend to think that staying is best for the children and don't want to break up the family. But essentially, I'm very clear cut on the sense that a good dad would never abuse the mother of his children.
no,
Point blank
no, no,
period.
no, no.
So we sit here and we try and separate the two, like, oh, he's such a good dad, and he really is there and he's caring and attentive to the kids, but yet he is coercively controlling, financially abusive, does all of the things to his mum. Point blank period, a good father would never abuse
No.
the mother of his child or children. And everyone always asks me, like, what was my defining moment of when I knew I had to leave, right? But it's impossible to have one moment for me anyway. Like
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
remember the abuse escalating rapidly towards the end. And one day,
yeah.
after a particular incident that my daughter had witnessed, she hadn't witnessed many, but this one particular incident she witnessed, I remember looking at her and thinking, oh my God, you're going to grow up and resent me the same way I resent my mum for not leaving. And like, don't get me wrong, I love my mum dearly. My
Yes,
mum's an absolute
yeah.
darling. She wouldn't hurt a fly. But as a child, as her child, I was always very angry and resentful that she didn't leave.
Why did
And
you leave?
and
Yeah.
worse than that, what if my daughter grows up without me completely? Then what?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And watching all those elements, and I think you sharing part of your story, which is so powerful as well. And I think any of us of a certain age remember all that horrific period of time in Kosovo, and so much that still goes on now, which is horrific. And the sad thing is, you like you say, you thought you were going to that freedom, but just to be taken into a whole different kind of
Yeah,
hell, and watching somebody you loved who, and I think it's really hard for children as well, because when they think, especially the parent that's the victim parent, usually is the empath, usually is the
yeah,
compassionate one,
yeah,
usually is the one that forgives time and time and time again, puts the family before themselves always. And watching that kind of that relationship, like you say, and it taints it, unfortunately, it does, because you love them, but you're like, you almost turn into society going, why didn't you just leave? But you also
yeah.
know that it wasn't that simple and it
No,
wasn't that straightforward.
absolutely. I mean, there
So
were so
hard.
many different factors that, prevented my mum from leaving. So many different cultural barriers, so many intersectionalities in my mum's identity. She'd come over as an asylum seeker, grown up in a community where divorce wasn't a thing. You don't do that. Domestic
Yes.
abuse was so normalized in communities like mine. I mean, it's everywhere. That issue is the same wherever you go in the world, but in
Yeah.
marginalized communities, when you are displaced from your home country and then you're having to raise children in a completely different country where you don't know the language, it's not your world, right? And the only source of comfort and safety, I use that term very loosely, you feel is within the community that you have, that marginalized community. It can be almost impossible to leave. There's so many barriers. And that's just community wise. That's not even
Yes.
discussing institutionally and systemically how difficult it is for a woman from a marginalized community to actually leave a perpetrator. And for me, I started to realize this pattern. So in October 2019, when I finally did manage to leave, and I was low risk, and all the frontline services had closed their doors. Again, a lot of these terms I use really loosely. Low risk. Is a victim survivor ever at low risk? I
Yeah.
personally don't think so. I think a
Yeah.
victim survivor is always at risk of the perpetrator, whether it's 10
Yes.
years down the line or whatever. But because I was no longer living with him, the services closed their doors and they're like, she's okay, she's safe now. But
Yeah.
I was left processing years and years of trauma. And then, of course, that was October 2019. Well, we all know what happened in March 2020. We're in the middle of a global pandemic and a lockdown, right? Nowhere to go, no one to talk to, nothing to distract me from the reality of what I'd survived. And then I started to notice this pattern in my life, right? I was going from one form of oppression to another. So my family had fled genocide, only for me to grow up in an abusive home. I escaped, went to university, only to then meet my ex-husband and become trapped in his abuse, right? Finally left him, and then we ended up in a global pandemic and a lockdown. And it just felt never ending, this
Never end.
cycle. And of course, like none of that is my fault. And I know anyone listening to this will be like, but that was not your fault. I know that. I'm very aware of that. But what I started to realize was how I responded and how I healed and recovered. That was my responsibility. And that's where I knew my life was heading next. And I realized that what was going to come next was within my control, because
Yeah.
when you've been with a perpetrator, especially if you have many different cycles of perpetration, like for me from childhood into adulthood, you lose a sense of autonomy and you think that
Yeah.
things aren't in your control. And after leaving, that's when I realized I was like, oh my God, my whole life is in my hand. This world is my oyster. Sorry to be so
Yeah.
cliche.
No, I
Um,
agree.
but I started to realize, I was like, okay, well, if I can do something about this, what is it that I can do? Because I was so desperate to find a community of other women, of survivors who understood me. And I searched everywhere, right? And it wasn't that I was finding pockets or small communities and I couldn't really connect with it. It just didn't exist. There was
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do because everyone told me to leave,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So they
Like,
tend to leave, but they don't tell you how to
yeah.
manage the next steps.
Yeah, like I was a victim of strangulation. I didn't know, I had no idea or awareness that perpetrators who strangle their victims are 7 times more likely to kill them.
Yeah.
I had no
Yeah.
awareness. I had no idea how much risk I was actually truly under. And when I couldn't find anything, I was just like, you know what? Fuck this. Like I was just desperate. A little bit of like, if you can't see the change, be the change moment. So I took to social media and I started sharing survival stories on behalf of other women, and the videos went viral instantly, which really is just shows how desperately the space was needed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So desperate for a space where women could come together and finally see themselves represented.
Yes, definitely. And when you talk about the marginalization, and there is so much of that we see, especially in this particular sector around abuse and around post-separation abuse. And I think you again just put it together so beautifully, and you talk about those barriers. And there's a lady called Dr. Aisha Ahmed, and we did an episode around Bangladeshi women. And again, it's all those interlinking moments of it's additional layers of things. So,
Yeah,
you think of somebody going through abuse. No, and I'm not saying for 1 second that we can, everybody's situation is unique to them, and every struggle that they face is unique. And very often, if you're experiencing abuse and post separation abuse, you're dealing with several different organizations, different systems. It can be
absolutely. Yeah.
child maintenance service, family courts, police, social services, Kafka, the list goes on and on.
Mhm.
And you can be involved with and repeating yourself over and over again. Well, for somebody that is from a marginalized group,
Yeah.
how the difficulty then is even accessing support,
Oh,
because like you
absolutely. I mean,
say, it's
I
yeah.
I know working frontline, how difficult it is for victim survivors, just from again like community aspect, and how the community a lot of the time tends to enable abuse and violence. But I get that's just barely scratching the surface, because then when they do access help, there's
Yeah.
other barriers like can we even get an interpreter to talk to the victim?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what
You will be
society doesn't think of.
surprised, so shocked at the amount of times I've had to open and close a case with a victim because we cannot get an interpreter
Yeah,
to talk to
it's
the victim.
heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. And that person is living with and to take that courage to actually ask for help and then not be able to be
Mhm.
understood or heard. And it's
Mhm.
only, you know, I noticed it's only in recent years we've started to, with many charities and organisations, to have various languages to be
Yeah.
able to access through the websites, you know. And you think that's only something that hasn't been very common till recently, I've noticed. And I thought, so if you go back a decade, how many people have been struggling? And also their own communities, like you say, domestic abuse being normalised in BAME community very often. And so trying to access that support when people are saying, well, what's your problem? This happens to everybody, you know,
Well,
you deal with it, put up and
yeah,
shut
and
up.
you have to think about how difficult it is for a white Western woman who knows the language, who understands the system, who
Yeah,
has settled status as a British citizen here in the UK, how difficult it is for her to access support. Can you imagine
yes.
how much harder it is for someone who doesn't know the language, doesn't have settled citizenship status, has no recourse to public funds, probably has no support outside of the immediate home? It's near enough impossible.
Possible. Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. And I think I've often said it's like it's a postcode lottery as well. You know, depending on where and this is where it does drive me insane, why there isn't support across the board for people. So you might find if you're fortunate to live in a certain area, you might have a domestic abuse charity with lots of
Yeah.
different funding for lots of different services. Amazing, fantastic. You get to access all of that. Somebody else, maybe 10 miles down the road, does not have access to any of that, or 20 miles down the road, or you know, and so things change. And to me, it shouldn't be a postcode lottery as to whether you get support or not, or be able to access it. It
Yeah.
should not be a lottery as to what kind of judge you get in a family court. You know, that's a whole other realm of, we could
God,
probably do a
yeah.
whole episode on that.
Yeah.
It should be a lottery as to the kind of Kafka's officer you get that understands the situation. The problem is within all that, like you say, systemically, abuse is not understood. So
No,
when you're,
exactly.
and for a victim and survivor, because they've been conditioned for so long to be afraid of authority, if you like. And like you say, not just physically, but that underlying tone of they're coming home, so I need to make sure you can feel that
Hmm.
fear rising in the pit of your stomach, and you don't really know why. And it's just that anxiety and so to then deal with people who don't understand, who are making decisions about your
Oh,
life, is just
absolutely
beyond
right. And
crazy.
this is why I call it insidious
Yeah,
because so if you get with my work frontline, so I've done working group supporting groups of perpetrators, to change
yeah,
their behavior. If you go into a group of perpetrators and you say to them, "Can we all agree that hitting a woman is wrong?" They will all say yes.
yeah,
They will also,
yeah,
every single one of them will nod along and say, yes, hitting a woman is absolutely awful. Okay. So in your circumstance, why was it justifiable? So we all know that hitting a woman is wrong. So essentially, you know it's wrong, but what you're saying is when you did it, it was justified. Yeah, but she
yeah,
cheated on me. Oh, so it
yeah,
was
yeah,
justifiable. So you know it's wrong, you did it anyway because you're
yeah,
able to
yeah,
justify it. And this is my point. They know this isn't about teaching people whether it's wrong or right. Everyone knows that hitting and being abusive and doing all of that is wrong,
yeah,
but
yeah,
people will do it because they feel like they can justify it.
yeah,
And when even like the whole tagline, Layla, please tell my story, the movement, that tagline didn't even come from me. This came from the women who are coming forward, the women who are these victim survivors, who were saying, oh my God, for the first time I see myself represented. They wanted a space to be seen and heard because they were have never felt seen and heard before with around the family, around the system, around definitely not around the perpetrator because the perpetrator thinks that the actions are justifiable.
yeah, yeah. And I don't think I've ever come across any victim or survivor who has talked about their situation and the perpetrators ever taken accountability. They don't know how, they can't take accountability. There is no accountability whatsoever. And you're right, it's that um, justifying their actions. And I was doing a talk recently, and somebody said, "Well, did drugs and alcohol kind of, do they have an impact on someone's behaviour?" And I said, anything around alcohol and drugs is going to exacerbate a situation, but it doesn't make someone abusive.
Yeah.
Someone's abusive because they're choosing to be
Oh,
abusive.
absolutely. And we have to be really, really clear on that. That people are abusive because they choose to be
Choose.
abusive.
Yeah,
It's not because they had a bad childhood. It's not because they have issues with drugs and alcohol or mental health or a personality disorder, or and none of that makes someone abusive. It's a choice.
It is a choice. It is a choice. And do you know what? Sometimes I get quite a bit of backlash for saying that. It's like, don't you think people can change? And don't you think there's when somebody has that trait within them where they can choose to be, like you say, abuse the mother and not take accountability, make excuses for all their actions. That isn't something that is easily changeable. It is something that is, we all have, like you've just said about your life and the atrocities you've had to face. And I think everybody at some point in their life will say there's certain parts or certain elements where this has happened, that's happened. It doesn't then make you go out and say, so I feel
No.
like
No.
actually the world owes me, so I'm going to act like a complete twat for the rest of my life. That
Absolutely
doesn't
not.
happen.
No.
That
And
doesn't
that's why it's
happen.
a choice. And that's why it's a choice. And you have to understand, as a institutionally, systemically, and socially, how much we have enabled perpetration. And that's
Yeah,
why at first, when Layla Please Tell My Story started, the storytelling series was anonymous because the women didn't want to come forward publicly. They were hiding from the judgment and the shame and the stigma and all of these really harmful narratives that society forces onto women.
yeah,
But the more stories I was sharing on my platforms, something shifted, and quite quickly within 7 to 8 months, the women whose stories I'd shared only anonymously, they personally began coming forward publicly, and they were like, "I'm tired of being anonymous. I'm tired of being this blacked out figure on these campaigns of this
yes,
woman carrying the corner," as I said. And they were the ones that were saying, I wasn't weak, I wasn't timid, I was confident. I was all of
yeah,
these things that the world told me to be, and it still happened to me. And I, it's not that I needed to believe them, but I knew it because I'd lived it myself. And I think where we minimize abuse and violence by saying alcohol and drugs or personality disorders or their upbringing, it's costing women's lives, and you have to
yeah, it is.
understand that when you're trying to label it by saying this mental health issue, alcohol or drugs, you are costing women's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that lack of accountability, that lack of this is where so much is going wrong, where we're actually stroking the ego of the perpetrator by saying, oh, well, it's this or is that. And do you know what's really interesting? I was just thinking about as well, when this misrepresentation, obviously, of how perpetrators, and in terms of yes, everything they do is purposeful. It's
Mm.
purposeful what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. There is no two ways because you talk to that many different people and you can't have that many unsolicited stories with all the same thread. It's like they've all gone to Sam Beckinsale said a while ago. It's like they've all gone to the same school. It's all that blueprint. It's the same blueprint. So many people go, oh my God, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. It's like they've all sat down together
Yeah.
and gone, this is how I'm going to behave. And there's so many similarities. And in a weird way, that kind of the similarities for victims and survivor, that's Pat, as Duncan Craig, who's no, he came on a while ago. He said that's Pat, that's the empowerment for victims and survivors. Is actually that's where our similarities come together. That's fine if the perpetrators all have their similarities and they all do the same thing, but actually our similarities is what makes us strong as victims and survivors because we now know we are now the experts because we know exactly what your next step is. We know
Yeah.
exactly what you're going to do next. We can preempt what's coming. So it
Yeah.
makes it less scary. It makes it less intimidating. And I think, all these soap operas, if they really want to represent a true victim or survivor, run that story for 10 years. If you
Yeah.
really want to truly,
Yeah.
not for a month,
Absolutely.
not for 6 weeks,
Yeah.
not for a couple of years, if you really want to represent victims and survivors, have that bubbling under the surface for a very long time and let's see the real representation.
Absolutely. And the thing is because we're just in the media, we're just portrayed as like statistics, but we're not.
Yeah,
We're not just statistics. We're not just case studies. We're real people with real voices, and we deserve to be heard and taken seriously. For far
yeah,
too long, survivors have been spoken about instead of with.
yeah,
And like,
yeah,
I lived inside that silence myself, right? When your reality is questioned. Now, one of the reasons how my work evolved from the anonymous storytelling series to the survivors who broke their silence, which is where the women come forward publicly, was the women saying they wanted to share their stories publicly, but also it was I had an experience with, I use that term very loosely. I had this thing, a production company approached me, a huge broadcaster approached me and said, "We're doing this documentary on domestic abuse. We'd really love to feature you on the documentary." And it was going on a huge platform, like worldwide platform. And I was like, yeah, like I really want to get my work out there. This was really early days as
Yeah.
well, about 5 years ago now. If only I'd had the knowledge then that I do now.
Yeah.
I'd spent months talking to the producers and then extracting all of this information and about my lived experience and also about that I was creating videos on social media about what does coercive control look like? What is gaslighting? Because
Mm,
women didn't even know what the red flags were.
no.
Anyway, I spent months and months talking to them about it, and it came to filming date. In fact, I'd even introduced them to other survivors in the community. So I'd almost like
Wow.
given them access to the community.
Yeah.
And a group of other women, along with myself, were going to take part of the documentary. And 3 days before filming, I was like, "Oh, I don't have my schedule yet. Let me call the producers." And, I could get on the phone to them. I was like, "Am I going to get my schedule for filming? We're supposed to be filming on Monday." And then they're like, "Oh, actually, we've spoken to our legal team and we can't feature you anyway because you don't have a conviction." And I was like, "You what?" It, I was floored. I was floored.
So without a conviction, you are not a victim or
Yeah,
survivor.
well, you become a legal liability in terms of broadcasting the story, right? And I was floored because this hadn't even occurred to me that this could be a barrier.
No. No.
Hadn't even this lack of conviction, which, by the way, is very rare to get a conviction against the perpetrator.
100%.
Your
Yeah.
chance are probably stronger to be struck by lightning
Yeah.
is to be
Yeah.
to get your perpetrator convicted.
Yeah.
And when they said that to me, I felt so invalidated. Like even now I can feel the emotions like kind of
Mhm.
coming up into the surface. I felt so invalidated. I felt like they'd stripped me of something that was real. And I remember sharing this on my platform at the time and with the other women that were going to take part in the documentary. And the women were like, "Well, we're not doing it then. Like, we're absolutely not. We're not like it was the first time I'd felt this sense of community."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, no,
Yeah.
no. Like, you girls go and do it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, just get it out there, because a few of the girls did have convictions." And they were like, "No,
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. If they're doing this to you, one survivor, imagine,
We
and
all know.
so yeah, it was the first time that I'd felt this sense of, oh my God, this is a real community here.
Yeah,
What
and that's how you were treated is beyond despicable. Sadly, not surprising by the media at all, as we well know, they have no idea in terms of literacy or how to deal with situations like this at all. And the way you were treated is despicable. And what what they don't appreciate is you retelling, victims and survivors, you retelling your story is like you're bringing it to life again, and
Yeah,
it's bringing it to life in those little segments and that trauma that they won't understand, how that and trauma is still so misunderstood. Someone can say, well, the cupboard door slammed, what's your problem? Or the front door slammed and you jump out of your skin.
yeah,
Oh, you need to just get over that.
yeah.
You don't just
Well,
get
yeah, because they
over.
think they think that once you've left, like you're
Yeah.
safe, right? And here's something that I learned in my own journey of recovery. I talk a lot about recovery. I'm very, very big on it. What I learned in my own recovery was that leaving and healing are not the same thing, and they
No,
shouldn't be related.
definitely not. Yeah.
Leaving doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden automatically okay within your own nervous system. That's not how it works.
No, no. And it's different for everybody, isn't it? So some people may feel, very often I've said, you can have days where you feel like you're on top of the world and things are getting there, and then it just takes something, a moment, whatever it is, whether it's the perpetrator's been in contact over the children or whatever it is, and you're dragged back down to square one again.
Yeah,
But you have already started moving forward, so that's the progress. And even if you do feel like you go back to square one sometimes, it's okay. It's
yeah,
all right to be there because you are already on that trajectory of going in the right direction. You're not going backwards completely. You might be back at square one of when you left. It's how
yeah,
it's made you feel, but that's only momentary. That isn't something that stays. You recognize it, you accept it, and say, okay, we start again, and they're not going to make it. And next time, maybe I won't go all the way back to square one. It might be square five,
yeah, yeah.
and I'll
And
keep,
the thing
yeah,
is, what happens far too often is how the pain for survivors is minimized because you can't
yeah,
see it when you're left with this long-term mental anguish is something that's hard to quantify. How do I give a 9 out of 10 to the post-traumatic
Mm,
stress I have now? You can't, that's not possible for me to sometimes even put into words and to articulate.
no,
And
no,
then
no.
we're treated as if like our uh safety after leaving, and I don't mean just at being at risk of the perpetrator, because everybody only ever focuses on that, the risk from the perpetrator, the risk from the perpetrator, and rightly so. But what we also need to understand is the harm that we feel going forward mentally and emotionally, and how we are then began to be treated as a complete inconvenience. Why can't you just get over
Yes.
it? Move on, it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And there is no expiration date. Abuse does not have an expiration date. The impact of abuse does not have an expiration date. And I love what you were saying then about and it's so true for anybody that listens. And I do get lovely messages afterwards, and people go, "Oh my God, they've hit the nail on the head with so many different things." And one of the things then you were saying, which is so true for anyone that's been through it in terms of conviction, and I would never want anyone thinking like you that your experience is invalidated by the fact you didn't get a
Yeah.
conviction. How many times, and I know you know this through your own work and you'll have seen it, and how many times when I worked for my local charity and I was working with victims and survivors, how many times did it never get to conviction status because the perpetrator was constantly harassing, intimidating the victim? They were scared of what was going to come out. They were scared of trying to protect the children and didn't want any more harm or pain coming to them. Things being thrown out because CPS, etc., blah blah blah, evidence based and all that. It's so poorly dealt. I mean, poorly is the wrong word. It's so horrifically, disgracefully dealt with, all of it, that it actually adds to a victim and survivor's pain. Is that they don't get that acceptance of what's happened. And so not having that conviction makes them feel like, well, actually, and the worst part is we know coercive and controlling behaviour has been an imprisonment offence for many, many years
Yeah.
now, and imprisonment of up to 5 years. It's a criminal offence. But how many
Um,
times is it proven?
Absolutely. I'm never ecstatic or excited when I hear new laws are coming into place
Yeah.
for survivors. I'm just like, okay, yeah, yeah, I'll see it when I'll
Yeah.
believe it when I see it, kind of thing. Because
Yeah.
and a lot of that, trying to find closure as a victim, as a survivor, for what you were subjected to is painful.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
if there's another survivor listening to this, I need you to understand that none of that is going to give you the justice that you deserve anyway. Even the
No.
conviction is never going to give you the justice you deserve, because the justice you deserve was for it not to happen in the first
Do not.
place.
Yes. That is beautifully said. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with that in mind, if I could give anyone advice who is in their, a recovery healing journey, is to absolutely put your recovery first, because trying to chase after that closure and the sorry and why did he do that? Why me? Is not going to bring you the life that you deserve after leaving. I know
Yeah.
it because I lived it. Like there I was like on talking on stages on Channel 4, on CNN, on all big broadcasters. I'd built this whole life and brand and business around being strong, right? I was like a survivor, thriver. I had my shit together. I was leading this whole community, raising my small family, holding it together for everyone else. And I turned my life into this like performance and into some kind of achievement so that all the pain and trauma could feel worth it in the end, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is for most of us as survivors, we carry that residue of what we endured.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that is so beautifully said. Actually, I need a moment. It was beautifully said, and I think you're right. And for many many people, it doesn't. It's not that it never goes away. It becomes a part of you, but it becomes a part of you that has made you who you are now because of that. And in some ways, and some victims and survivors will say, I'm not thankful for what they did, but I didn't know what I was capable of until I was left with no other option.
Yeah,
And I would never have known what I was capable of if that hadn't have happened. And I'm not thanking the perpetrator, they would say, but I am who I am now because of that and where I am. And that residue is there, but it's also there as a reminder that actually I'm capable of so much more than I ever thought possible.
yeah. And I
Amazing.
think sometimes a lot of that has to do with, how misogynistic anywhere you go, cultures
Yeah.
and I'm not just talking about marginalized communities here. I'm talking about absolutely every single community you go into, whether it's here in the UK or in America or somewhere in Europe or wherever in the world is we have a misogynistic culture,
Yeah.
essentially, wherever you go, right? That's something that's universal experience for women. And women aren't taught that they don't ever have to be grateful for suffering.
No.
You never,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
do not owe
Yeah.
your perpetrator any gratitude or any
Mm.
forgiveness. And I know that society likes to make you feel like you do in order for you to recover
Yeah.
and move on. I promise you from my own lived experience, you do, that is only going to stall you because you're never going to get it.
I'm so glad you've said that. The number of times I've heard victims and survivors say it and say, well, if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be this or I wouldn't be that.
No, but you
And
know what? You have to
it's
believe in yourself
heartbreaking.
as a woman that you absolutely still would have been strong. I'm not
Yes.
strong because of what happened to me. I'm
Yeah.
strong in spite of it.
In spite of it. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. And anybody that's listening and has felt that because it happened as X, Y, and Z is that yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. It is the in spite of that,
Yeah,
not because of.
and
Yeah.
I speak a lot from my own experience now doing this work for the last 5 to 6 years in the sector, is that I thought that by kind of ignoring my own recovery and giving other women something that I never had, which was a safe space to be seen and to be heard, that I'd eventually feel that safety too within me, right? And I thought that if I just kept doing and kept going and kept giving more, reaching millions of women worldwide, because that's how far and wide the campaigns go, and supporting them from frontline all the way to recovery. I thought that somehow the peace within myself would appear like magically.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I found that, and I know that us as survivors, we tend to go into savior mode quite quickly. We want to save everybody afterwards. We're like, oh my God, I've got this lived experience. I don't want anyone else to go
Go
through
through.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, and we do that, and that's actually a really dangerous way to practice to help
That's a
other
very good
women.
point to
It's
highlight,
really
actually, because
dangerous.
yes, yeah, please highlight that. That's so
Yeah.
important because I do think so many victims and survivors think, I don't want anyone else to experience it. So now I'm going to give even more from my cup, even though there's bugger all left in it.
Uh,
And
uh,
yeah,
Absolutely, because that's what I realized that whilst my work was life-changing for other women, it was costing me something huge and it was costing me,
yes,
I was robbing myself on my own recovery.
yeah,
Because I was
yeah,
so
yeah,
busy helping everyone else heal that I forgot to stop and ask myself probably the most important question I'd ever asked myself in my whole entire life, which was, Layla, what do you need?
you want, yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you see your life? What do you want? And because it's never been something that you've been able to ask yourself, I would imagine, that actually this is the first time you can go, yeah, but hang on. And I think
Yeah.
a lot for victims and survivors, they feel, but what I want doesn't matter because the family comes first. And like we were saying before, it's always the victim survivor, very much the empath, putting themselves at the bottom of the pile, making sure that everybody else is happy. And so it feels almost like selfishness to some people. They'll go, but I feel selfish, but it's not selfishness at all.
You
It's
have to put yourself,
liberating.
listen, you have to put yourself first, right? I come first because if I don't come first, I'm not a good mum. If I
No.
don't put my own mental health, my own wishes and wants and needs first, if I don't prioritize myself,
Yeah.
I'm going to be an awful mum, an awful partner, an awful practitioner. I'm not going to be able to serve the community the way that they deserve to be served.
Yeah.
You have to come first.
You
You put
have
yourself
to.
on the back burner and burn yourself out completely, and then come and tell me how that's working out for you.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think it's important for people to hear that because I do, again, that's something I hear a lot is, but I can't put myself first. I've got to think of the children or my parents or the this or the that. And it isn't selfish. It's actually self-awareness. It's
I think
self-awareness.
it's essential to do that as a
Yeah.
woman, as a survivor. I think it's absolutely essential. Putting yourself first doesn't mean that you neglect your kids or your partner.
No, we're not talking about going off and having a bubble
Yeah,
bath
we're
and
not.
ignoring them not
Yeah,
cooking the tea.
exactly. We're not talking about neglecting your loved ones. That's not what we mean. We just mean you need to put yourself on the same esteem as you do your children and your partner.
Exactly. And that in that way, you will be showing your children this is the human being you want to be. Somebody
Yeah.
that has value in themselves, knows what they want. And because again, for victims and survivors, they've put themselves down for so long, it is time to go, actually, what do I want?
Yeah.
It's not a selfish fact, it's
Yeah.
what do I want out of life? I have
No,
every right, just
absolutely.
like everybody else on the planet, to want something for myself, whether it's
Absolutely.
a
And
career, whether it's another relationship, whatever it is that they want. And you do find a lot of people, don't you, will say, I will never meet anyone ever again. And I did say in a group a while ago, I said, all I would ever say is don't completely close yourself off to the idea. Not saying
Mm.
jump into something, absolutely not. Take time, have time for you, do what's right for you. You may find that you are in a relationship that you think, oh my God, I've made the same mistake again. Okay, but you've recognized it. Maybe you've recognized it a bit sooner this time. Not, everybody handles things differently. But I don't know how you feel about this, but I would always say don't completely close yourself off to the potential of something at some point.
Well, essentially, a lot of women will say, "Oh, I just want to be myself again. I'll be myself." You're never going to be that version of who you were before you met the perpetrator. The
No.
best thing that you can give to yourself is actually explore who you are now.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm
I
telling you from my own lived experience, and practicing, like going back to that comments we were making about, practicing from savior mode, because
yeah.
I did it myself, right? And I realized that I got so burnt out in my own recovery because I was neglecting myself, putting everyone first. Because it didn't matter how many stories I told, it didn't matter how many women were messaging me saying, "Thank you, I'm finally free." Because underneath it all, I was screaming to myself, like, I want to recover.
Yes. Yeah. And I
What I'm
need
doing
it.
here is not recovery.
No, that's so true. That's so true. And that has to come first. And I think anything that comes after that is going to work out however it will work out. And usually if you've looked after yourself first, you're in a better headspace, you're in a better emotional space to be able to say, okay, I feel like I can start to explore life
Yeah.
outside of myself again. At the moment, though, I come first and my own wants and needs come first. And something else, I think, in terms of you therapeutically now, I think it's so important because I know from experience, having had counselling myself, and I've never talked about it before, but I've had counselling myself. And for me, the particular type it was because it wasn't centered around abuse, it was very generic. I really struggled because I didn't feel like I was understood. And I think this is where I do think lived experience is important. When you're talking to people about your experience, you do need people that understand in a professional, but also in a lived experience way 100%, because I think a lot of people struggle and go, oh, I couldn't go for counselling, or I couldn't go for therapy, or I couldn't go for coach, I couldn't do all these things, and because they won't understand. But
Yeah.
actually it's important to realize people like you are out there now doing this and going, actually I do
Actually, you do
understand.
understand very
I
well.
do.
And that's why I created the recovery program, the Survivors Circle, because the burnout and the poor mental health forced me back into my own recovery. And I reached a
Yeah.
point, talking about therapy, because I reached a point where I've been in therapy for 6 years now. I am a big advocate for therapy. So before I make this statement, I need people to understand, I think everybody should go to therapy.
Yes.
I'm such an advocate. It's why I will be training to become one myself, right? But I did get to a point where, regardless of how much therapy I was going on a weekly basis, it just got to a point where the therapy alone wasn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
I needed a bit of a larger toolkit because I realized somewhere along the way, I was so busy in the doing that I didn't stop to realize I'd actually outgrown survival mode, but I
Yeah.
didn't know how to rest peacefully or give myself any grace and compassion. I was giving it
Yeah.
so freely to everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
I didn't know how to give it to myself. And I realized I didn't need anyone to come along and save me. And like, spoiler, nobody's coming to save you. The sooner you accept that, the better it
Yeah.
is for you, right? The easier it is for you to going to move through your recovery. What I
You
realized
will.
was
Yeah.
that instead I needed a space, right? I needed a
Yeah.
space to take off my armor without feeling like everything was falling
Mm.
around me. And I wanted to be held and seen by other women who, not for everything that I was achieving, not quite, but for what I had survived.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah.
be witnessed by other women who just understood it.
We just understood. Yeah.
And I
And
wanted,
yeah.
equally, I also wanted them to see who I was becoming after it.
Yeah, and that's the importance, I think, as well. It's that, we talk about journeys, but it is that journey. And for a lot of people to see, they need people like you out there that they can look at and go, I can't quite see it now, but I know I can get there.
Yeah.
Can't quite see how I'm going to get there,
I
but
know
it can
something's
happen.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
But something's happening. Yeah.
And it's really important when we do this work as well, which is why I would say that my recovery program is a specialist recovery program specifically for survivors of domestic abuse, because I started studying around this time when I was like went back into my own recovery about how
Yeah,
trauma impacts the brain and the body and the nervous system and how survival mode changes everything.
yeah,
And the disconnect we feel, it's not a flaw, it's a physiological response to years of harm.
yeah, 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 yeah. And it is going to happen. There is no way around it.
Yeah,
There
and
isn't
that's my
like,
point.
yeah,
You can try and ignore it, but it's not going to happen. And that's when like I was that point in my journey where I realized that this combination of the brain and body connection and having trauma-informed therapy and also being in true community with other survivors,
yes,
that
yeah,
was it. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This for me
yeah,
felt like this magic formula.
yeah.
And it wasn't that it didn't help me just feel like myself again. I didn't want to feel like myself again. She was
No,
stuck. I didn't
yeah,
want to
yeah.
be the old version of me.
No,
You know,
no, no,
and it's important. I think women need to hear that. All of this, oh, I just want to be who I was before. You're never going to be that person again. And
no.
that's okay. We
And
don't
it's
want to be
okay.
that
Yeah,
person again.
yeah. And nor would you, if you really sat for a moment and thought about it, nor would you want to be that person again. You know,
No.
you wouldn't want to be that person again. There's so much you've learned along the way, and there's so much power in everything you've experienced, and actually you deserve to be you,
Yeah,
not an appendage to somebody else, not anything other than you. You are unique, you are amazing, and you have every right to put yourself first. I love it. Oh my God, you and I could talk for blooming hours. I knew it. I said to you before we started, didn't I? Was like, we're so going to be doing another episode. I
we're gonna
just
have
know
to
it.
do a part two, aren't
Got to
we?
do a part two. We've got to. But I'm so grateful because you are incredible, and the way you speak and the way you talk about things. And I think so many people will be sitting there. And what I love is when I go and look at the stats for Dip In and Out, and there's lots that come from America, lots that come from Australia, and from all over the world. And what I love is it's it's the same the world over. So it doesn't matter if someone's living in America and listening and going, oh well, I don't. They everybody gets it.
Yeah,
Everybody gets it, and in some ways that's sad because that shows it's such a sad statement that the world is like this. But
yeah,
also, if we look at it from the positive, the power is that everybody can sit together and go, I get that, and I know what she's
absolutely.
saying, and I get what she's saying, and
Absolutely.
you're amazing. You are.
Thank you so much
I
for
wanted
having
to
me.
say, I do. I'm like that. And I'm lucky that I've met you in person, and I know we'll be meeting up again. I know we will. You know, our paths will be crossing. But I want to be able to make sure at the end of the episode, I put any links in to you're very, very prevalent on Instagram, aren't you? You're on
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
That's somewhere I'm not very good at, but anyway. Yes, I will make sure links and things are in there so people can go and find you and find all your information, what you're up to. And then I do think we need an update as to what's going on, maybe in a few months' time. We'll
Oh,
just see how
absolutely.
things are going because I'm very excited for you and you deserve everything that's coming your way. You really do. You're an
Thank you
amazing
so
human
much.
being.
And I'll be back. We'll do a part two next
We
time.
will. We will. The Layla and Lucy show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Lucy.
Thank you.